Torah finance. Just about every religious establishment that I know of has this wrong, especially when it comes to the tithe. In this session, we're going to sort that out and also offer you an alternative translation for that most difficult passage of Luke 16:9, which I quote in this dubious translation, "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal habitations." Ever wonder about that? Well, hang in there. Let's find out what Yeshua really says.
You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents, direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology, and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Okay, so let's talk about it. What I want to talk about today, and I hope that you will join me, is this very difficult allegory in Luke 16:1 and following. Last week we did another really difficult allegory, and that was the one about the rich man in Hades, or Dives in Hades. That's tough. This one's tougher. Less clues, more obscure. Suppose I read it to you, and then you tell me what it says, because I'm not all that sure, but I might have the answer to it. Does that sound okay? Sure. How did you like those certificates, by the way? Everybody said theirs was good. I only had one that had an error on it. Okay. I sent them off to the printer today, and what you should be getting when it's all done is the certificate in one of those nice folders, and it'll have our seal on it as well. It's really official. We're trying to be professional. Professional in the best way, not in the worst way. All right. So you've got one hurdle behind, the easiest one. Now it gets a little more difficult. They were impressed. Good. And the Lazarus breakdown was stimulating. Where did you get that word, stimulating? Well, we have the Hebrew professor on here today, and what he told me is that we would most probably, depending on what happens on Wednesday night, get a free Hebrew class out of him. And that's Professor Smith. Yes, he's very good. He's taught Hebrew 3 or 4 times before for us. Everybody gave thumbs up to his lesson. I think that it's prayer book Hebrew, which really gets you started. And then I know Professor Smith, about a year ago, we were talking about the possibility of a class that went beyond prayer book Hebrew into an intermediate Hebrew class. And I think I might take it this time, except I can't remember anything anymore, but I would give it a try. That's great. And if you are part of this organization, it's not going to cost you anything. Oh, yes, you got all kinds of good stuff for lesson plans and so forth. Yes, that's right. Whoever has interest, we're going to pay him a little something. Paleo Hebrew? Why would you want to learn that? Just curious.
Well, isn't it, I guess by saying Paleo Hebrew, I should say the Hebrew that, as far as we can tell, the way it was written in.
Non-box Hebrew.
I don't like the modern Hebrew, so, let me rephrase that. It's not biblical Hebrew, though, you know what I mean?
Well, I would have to let Professor Smith answer that question, because I would say that it is biblical, but I'm not the expert, and here he is. He says Paleo has no grammar. Miss the rest of that. In reality, it's all reverse phonetic from the Masoretes. Right. Masoretes, Masoretes. Etes. Look it up. Aramaic is so hard to read. I mean, at least in Hebrew, you've got the box letters that you can at least tell the difference between the two. But in Aramaic, it's just like scribbles. I'm wondering, did Aramaic play into Arabic? Because it's just scribbles too. No answer to that one. Okay. Modern biblical is the best start. What else does that say? Then easy to adopt to the other. Yeah, I would say so. Arabic is also another good one to learn. You get a more primordial Semitic sound. You see how smart he is? That's why we call him Professor Smith. If you want to extrapolate the real ancient sound, you need to study Aramaic and Arabic along with Hebrew. And Sean McKinley says, wow. I didn't realize that. I can read the Hebrew, but I learned from transliterated Hebrew most of what I know. When I look at a box letter Hebrew, I have to go slow. I can get it, but I have to go slow. And in that prayer book Hebrew, I went through the books by myself, and what I saw there is what I'd almost call liturgical Hebrew. And I liked it because I'm into liturgy, and I'm into the holy and sanctity of the liturgy. That was nice. How about the books? You can buy the books online. They're fairly expensive. I don't know if you have PDF of those books or not that we could pass on. All right. I'm going to read this allegory to you, and I want you to listen carefully and give me some kind of an interpretation, if you will. Let's see what we can do right off the bat. Luke 16:1. Yeshua also said to the disciples, get my microphone up here. Don't worry, Melissa. There's nothing about hell in this one. You get your chance to see whether hell exists or not. It does, but it's not meant for human beings.
Hey, can you, would you be able to send Sherry April an invite? I think she wants to get in.
I don't know how to send an invite anymore. They changed.
She's already here, Melissa.
Oh, is she? Are you in,
here.
Sherry?
I see her, Sherry April.
Oh,
Sherry,
yay.
won't you come out tonight?
She's right down there where, well, Professor Smith is where Paul Land used to sit.
I got something to tell you about that. I got these new glasses. My grandmother used to call me Charles Nelson Riley.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't like it.
There, yeah.
Especially when
you
I
didn't
more
like it.
life. No.
Yeah, Charles. I remember him.
There was a rich man, Divus, who had a steward, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in your account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Has anybody here ever been fired from a job?
Yes.
Is there anybody that hasn't been fired from a job? It's a sad experience. I've been fired.
I'm the only one that'll admit it.
You will? Okay.
I admit it. I did.
You can tell us about it later.
Okay.
3, and the steward said to himself, what shall I do? Since my master is taking the stewardship away from me, I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do. Then what happens to it? Oh, listen, I got to find the rest of it. Here it is. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And he said to another, how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. And the master commended the unrighteous steward for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are shrewder in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, making friends for yourself by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal habitations. And some say, when you fail, they may receive you into the eternal habitations. He who is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and he who is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve Yahweh, you cannot serve Elohim and Mammon. I want to leave it at that. Let you think about it right now, because I smell my lamb shank burning up. This is a good segue. Think for a minute. Formulate an idea. There's got to be a deeper meaning in that passage about the eternal habitations. I'll be right back. You can sing the Jeopardy song in that particular time, and I'll be back by the end of it.
Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Nobody thought that was funny.
I thought it was funny, Melissa, but I expected you to start singing, humming the tune.
I love making outbursts. I'm just terrible. But that one song, remember that show Tic-Tac-Toe or something like that? It would go, wait, how did that one go?
I don't know.
Can't remember now.
I cook with a $14 steamer. I just throw everything in there, let it boil. Okay, who has an idea? Who can help me?
I'm reading over it again.
Okay, I'll give you a little more time. I figure there's got to be a catch in there someplace. Both the master and Yeshua commend an unrighteous steward. Well, Yeshua calls him unrighteous. Now, if you listen to the recitations I did in
well, it seems to me, and I could be completely wrong, I often am, in verse 9, where he says, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, you shall receive you into everlasting dwelling. In other words, if you decide to make friends for yourselves with unrighteous money and you will fail, then you will receive everlasting dwelling.
I wonder about that word everlasting. I know what it is in Greek. It's aeon or eon, which doesn't mean everlasting. It means something like for a long time or an age. What do you think that might be in Hebrew? Olam haba, age lasting. Yeah, where did you get that idea, Sean? Age lasting. That's good.
Yeah, it was from when I was a dispensationalist. We were big into the Greek Paul stuff anyway. That's where I got that definition from.
Okay. I didn't know that dispensationalists could read. That's supposed to be funny. Okay. Anybody else?
I have an interesting version here I'm looking at. It's the Names of God Bible. Not a huge fan of it, but it's interesting in this reading with that same verse is in verse 9. Yeshua continued, I'm telling you that although wealth is often used in dishonest ways, you should use it to make friends for yourselves. When life is over, you will be welcomed into an eternal home. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with a lot. I just thought that was an interesting.
What you're saying is, in that translation, take your money, make worldly friends with it, and then you'll be accepted into an everlasting home. That's my problem with it. And I have read a lot of different interpretations of that. There's also a Didache passage that goes along with this. It's about the Nevi Emet. Yet each Nevi Emet who wants to settle among you is worth his food. Likewise, a More Emet is worth his food just like the worker. So you'll take all first fruits of the produce, the wine vat, the threshing floor of your cattle and sheep, and give them as first fruits to the Nevi'im, prophets, for they are your Kohanim Hagadol, your high priests. If you bake bread, take the first fruits and give it in accordance with the mitzvah. Likewise, when you open a bottle of wine or oil, take the first fruits and give them to the Nevi'im. Yes, and even of money, clothing, and every other possession. Take the first fruits, whatever seems fair to you, and give in accordance to the mitzvah. If you have no Nevi, provide for the poor instead. We'll take a look and see how that fits in a minute. But I can tell you right off the top that it's in accordance with sanctifying money. Yahshua spoke about the sons of the world, immoral and greedy men, how when they spread the cash around, they'll be hailed by their party friends when their own fortune fails. Now, that is pretty much the temporal side of this whole thing. Spread the company money around, spread it like a farmer spreads pig manure on a cornfield. Have you ever been around when the farmer spread his pig manure on his cornfield? If you were around, you would know it. He's driving that old honey wagon out there full of SHIT, dumping that stuff, getting out and raking it around. It's kind of a parable in itself on the world. So a rich business owner has an overseer in his employ, like a CEO. The owner only hears that the CEO is wasting his money. He doesn't know that's a fact. However, rumor is enough to get him in trouble, and the owner tells him plainly, I'm going to terminate your employment. The owner doesn't fire the CEO outright, although he should. According to the worldly wisdom, you never tell somebody you're going to fire them and wait 2 weeks more to do it, so they can sabotage your business in the meantime, like what this unrighteous steward seems to be doing, which would be the wise thing to do if he was really dishonest. Get rid of him. Keeping the CEO on board long enough to settle accounts gives him an opportunity to embezzle or sabotage. But maybe the owner of the business is only putting his CEO to the test, as Yeshua does quite often. We'll see. Anyway, the CEO, he considers his options. The job market is very tight for men of his age, income, status. He certainly can't take a job at the Taco Bell after being the boss. He's not Taco Bell material. He certainly can't dig ditches after years as a desk jockey any more than I could. What'll he do? What will he do? Here's what he'll do. He makes some quick calls on his delinquent customer. He's ready to deal. For debtors on an inexpensive commodities like wheat, he says, if you pay now, I'll take off 20%. For high markup commodities like oil, he says, if you pay now, I'll take off 50%. He makes lots of calls, settles lots of delinquencies, and does it in a short time. Something he should have been doing long before this, settling up delinquencies. So who's he cheating? He's still in charge of the accounts, though perhaps for a short time. He hasn't been terminated. So he still has the authority of the owner to do business, else the owner wouldn't have commanded him to settle accounts. The owner commands him to settle accounts and tells him he's going to be fired. In fact, when he does settle up with the owner, he seems to get a certificate of achievement for his wall. Most delinquent accounts are settled, signed Phineas T. Thippelhopper, president. It's a win-win situation for everybody, at least it seems to be. The owner gets his accounts settled, though at a discount. He would have had to pay the discount anyway in the end. If you've ever worked in supply and demand, you'll know that that's true. It comes to a point when even your debt collectors say, well, we'll settle this for 50% or sometimes 25%. Now, the debtors get an excellent cut. The steward, the CEO, though he gambles with his master's money, which he's been doing all along anyway, he retains his job. He won't have to dig or beg or roll burritos or spread manure, though the owner's keeping a sharp eye on him from now on. Now, there's one problem with this, and that is that Yeshua calls him unrighteous. Dikeos. The Greek word means against the law. And when we're talking about law here, we're usually talking about Torah. Practices that are shrewd, but commendable and right and completely acceptable and entirely legal in handling other people's money within the economics of the world are simply not acceptable in handling the blessings of Yahweh, that he has advanced those who worked for him. I think he's teaching that, like humans in the unregenerate state, money itself is unrighteous by nature. It's unclean. Watchman Nee writes a great book about this. It's called The Spiritual Man. If you ever get a chance to read that book, just read the part on finances. Very good. If you get a chance, listen to my recording of The Mark, Esoteric Christianity. It deals with this fully, and it gives you an interpretation that you can accept. The Mark by Maurice Nicole. But money takes on a life of its own. In fact, money can become a god. Haven't we known people who most definitely worship money, even outwardly, even publicly? Righteous and honest people, the elect of Yahweh, aren't cut out for many prosperous business positions of the world because they'll be expected to utilize unrighteous means to multiply unrighteous mammon, often for unrighteous people with unrighteous causes. Can you imagine how you would work out working in an office in a big business? I worked one time in a grain co-op, and I was to settle accounts there. I was the accountant, and I had worked in a bank previously. And what I noticed about the grain co-op is that their checking account was always at least $200,000 in the red. Now, I went to the boss about this. How can you do this? So, oh, they just let us do it. Don't worry about it. Don't tell anybody about it. Don't tell anybody. And I got a lecture on not telling about what's going on in business. 200,000 on a daily basis or more in the red in their checking account. I guess the bank thought, well, we can't let anybody else have this account. He'll pay up sometime. And they weren't charging him anything. But once I discovered that and went in and talked about it, I was on the chopping block after that. Within a very short time, I was fired. That was the reason. How can we let a business that we work for get away with those kind of things? Doesn't that sin pale on us? Doesn't it shadow us as well when we go along with it? Makes it very difficult. I think about those people that are having to work on Shabbat. We have a couple of them in our group. They have to. Their family depends on them. They lost so much work during the lockdown that they simply have to work on Shabbat. And it's okay, I guess. I don't give them any trouble about it, but they are tortured about it. They themselves are tortured because of it. Two in particular fellows are tortured. But what else can they do? Well,
isn't it true though, being in the being in exile basically basically. I mean, didn't Yahweh say, you're going to go to other lands and you will be under the rule of those mighty ones. So you don't have a choice when you live in a society in exile. I mean, Yahweh said this was going to happen.
I agree with you. And even though we're supposed to have leave for religion, we don't. It happened to me too. I got my schedule changed once. I was working in a call center, and they left me off on Saturday because I had meetings at that time. And then they came in and said, we can't allow that anymore. You're going to have to work on Saturday. Well, what can you do? Here's your prayer. Prayer is get me off on Shabbat, even if it means having me fired. And I was fired from another job for that. As I put in a complaint about it, I'm gone. What does the government do about that? Nothing. Sons of light, daughters of light, even if they do, it seems like they suffer on the inside. Wouldn't you say?
I would. It is torturous. My son and I had this conversation not too long ago. He works for the Postal Service, and most of the time he has to work on Saturdays.
How does he feel about it? Is he a Sabbatarian?
Well, he's obviously not because he works on the Sabbath, but he knows about it and has asked me, well, what am I supposed to do? I have a family and I just told him because I don't want him to be tortured about it because I don't see that is going to change anything or solve anything.
Right.
I think that, and I did tell him, I said, well, you have to understand that we are living in the exile and this is part of our punishment.
I think that's a
part of it.
Answer.
And so it is what it is. There is coming a day where it will not be so. And I pray that you will live to see that day. But don't torture yourself over it because, this is just part of the punishment of being in exile.
Last week's story about divas in Hades, I'll tell you what, these guys have been Sabbatarians all their life that I know, and they are in a fiery Hades over this. They haven't settled in on it. It's so ingrained in them. But I think that is one way that we could explain it. I would be glad to hear if Professor Smith is here. We've talked about this before. If you're still here, maybe you could break in and tell us what your opinion is on it. I don't know if you're still here or not, but it seems like what Yahshua means is that devilish people will fare better than godly people in unclean or unrighteous manners. Because the devilish get their shrewdness naturally from their father, the father of lies. I'm not talking about an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, and neither is Yahshua. He already covered that in an earlier allegory. He's talking about selfish speculation, taking the opportunity to gain for oneself from that which is the property of Elohim, or the property that Elohim has entrusted to him. So in light of this low view of money, Yahshua says something baffling in verse 9. Again, make friends for yourselves with unrighteous mammon. Remember that mammon he's speaking of is an actual god that was worshipped at that time. I have this out on my website with a picture of that god. He is not good looking. He's an ogre like Moloch, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal habitations. But what in the world does that mean? We've given some ideas of what it means, but it's still baffling. There's two surprising secrets, I think, that answer the question of meaning that I'll share in a little bit. I guess Professor Smith is not here. Okay.
No, I'm here. I was just texting things back and forth.
All right.
Here in the chat room in this room, some answers and things.
Can you get
comments?
Can you get it on our recording? What your feeling is about you have people perhaps working on Shabbat? They might feel guilty. What's your opinion about that? I know that you're a very strict Sabbatarian.
Yeah. Well, we look at it this way, that it's a community burden, and when we get into prayer on the Sabbath, we will, if someone is lamenting that, there has to be, the petitioner has to make the petition. That's part of where the deliverance comes from. But the community itself, we get into prayer and ask the Father to open another job doorway. And anytime that we have ever had to do that, we've never, ever had a situation to where the Father didn't bring another job along. And we prayed for jobs for people, for various reasons, people that didn't have a job. And within a week, they had a job. But we we followed a very number one, the petitioner has to be on their heart to do so. Number two, the community has to rally around them, and we have to really get into the kind of prayer that probably in modern society most people they've never either been in that or they have never done so themselves.
Jackson Snyder presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
But that's really the solution.
You have to go above.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think it definitely has to be. And the other thing that you really hit on the head was that the person has to be a part of the conspiracy against the devil. I mean, they can't just say, yeah, I want to not work on Shabbat. They have to say, I'm going to stand on the promise and expect something better. Once it happened to me a couple of times, as I mentioned, another job came along within a couple of weeks. It was a good vacation because what I was doing was very stressful. And the new job was better. I just believe that you can move up that way, if you will. Okay. You know, Yahweh doesn't have a lot of money. Mammon or money is corrupt because it's the currency of the world, which is at enmity with the Almighty. And that's why Yahweh doesn't have a lot of money. No, he doesn't. Do you remember when the chief priests sent their corporate spies to Yahshua and asked him, is it permissible for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Luke 20:22. Yahshua points out that the face on the coin is that of Caesar, or Caesar, the emperor, the beast, the symbol of the world. At that time, it would probably have been a picture of Tiberius or Augustus. And I think this is probably, his answer is one of the most clever answers of any wise man that I have ever heard. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Give to Elohim what's Elohim's. On our coins and bills, they're pictures of world rulers and buildings fashioned after Roman architecture and some that acclaim pagan gods. So the money itself is tainted with images of godlessness and idolatry. And that money belongs to the world and its prince. That's why, though Yahweh may have all the silver and gold and cattle on 1,000 hills, he doesn't have much money. Money belongs to the world and exalted ruler. We can't imagine what it would be like without money. I know some of us get by on very little of it, but we get by. I think part of that is supernatural in that we have the opportunity to sanctify our money. And so it will spread further. As the song says, though, money does make the world go round. It's ironic that money is also necessary to build the kingdom of Yahweh in some sense, at least to build it in this world. We have to pay the preacher, pay the phone bill, pay the waste disposal company, pay the government with money. The question we need to answer is, how do we divorce the image of the world from our currency? Or how do we take something godless and unclean and make it set apart, kadosh? And there's always been a way to do that. I don't know why it is so overlooked. That has to be sanctified. In temple times, you know, they would bring their money with pictures on it and exchange it for money that didn't have pictures on it with, of course, a very large surcharge. The temple was like going to the county fair. I mean, temple and feast, county fair, where you're going to get your wallet ripped off of you. They're not going to let you go until they've got you upside down, shaking you by the ankles for all your money. And in temple times, every member of every assembly paid a church tax. This was a tax solely for the upkeep of the property. It wasn't that much when you think of all those Jews and those that identified with Jews and even all those pagans that paid the temple tax. I figured it out one time at about $25 a year. I've seen other estimates that was much, much higher than that. But consider if there were 500,000 people paying it at $25 each every year or twice a year with that half shekel tax. They would be rolling with money among the Templars. Everyone gladly paid it. Everyone. If the coin had Caesar's image on it, it was traded for an imageless token, as I mentioned, before it was given. The ministers then sanctified the money by spending it entirely on items that were to be consecrated for use in or repair of the property. Get this. This is important. This is how the temple tax was sanctified, because it was spent in accordance with the Torah. So that temple tax only went to the temple, to its maintenance and upkeep. No person got a cent of it, or it was not sanctified. But in addition to the tax, every single soul paid a tenth of all their income to their minister. This is the first tithe. The tithe never went into the church fund, never went to pay anything in the temple, but it went directly to those doing ministry, except, of course, when the fat cats would hold up the money that was supposed to go out to the country, to the poor priests that are spoken of in Acts, that were supposed to get a cut of the tithes that came into the temple, but they didn't, because somebody in the temple that was in charge of the money was putting it in their own pocket and not paying those guys in the country. It says that they were starving to death out there. We imagine that one of those priests out in the country was James the Just. No wonder they called him Ebon, poor. The tithe never went to the church, never went for the upkeep of the building, only went directly to those doing the ministry, the preacher, the teacher, the missionary, the musician. Every cent of the tithe. Not even a light bulb was bought with the tithe unless the minister bought it with his own part of it. According to the prophet, to rob the preacher of the tithe is serious unrighteousness. And when we did the Bible quiz last week, we had that exact verse in Malachi 3:8. And I think, Vicky, didn't you get that one? Will a man rob Elohim?
I did.
Okay, that's what I thought. That tells you a lot right there. But where does the money come from in the church? To pay the utilities, to pay for a new pew, to put on a new high steeple, or maybe a new image of Mother Mary. They collect tithes for that. That is not Torah. The tithe should go to your Levite. And just because we don't have blood Levites these days doesn't mean that we don't have people that Yahweh puts in to substitute that for that particular job in the temple.
Can I ask you a question? I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah.
I thought you said when you were talking about the temple tax that it was used for the upkeep of the property.
Yeah.
And that would be according to Torah.
Anything that had to do with building, grounds, that kind of thing. That was what the tax was for.
Well, then okay. So you just said that it should not go for the property. It should go to the priest.
Oh, I'm
Levite.
sorry. What I meant was the tithe is to go to the priest, preacher, teacher.
And not the property.
No, but this is not what we're taught in church.
But that's it. So the temple tax, then that's a separate issue than the tithe.
First thing we have is a temple tax. Second thing we have is the tithe. Then we have a couple more.
Okay.
Yes.
I thank you. That clarified it.
No church will sanctify the money properly according to the Torah because they're not using it properly. What they do is often, especially in evangelical churches, when they take up an offering, so-called, the minister gets some percentage of that offering, which means the more people the minister can get into the church, the higher his pay will be. I worked with one minister, poor guy, he was addicted to golf, and he only got 10% of what was coming in for tithes and offering. 10%. Fortunately, I was working in a bank at that time, and I could cover his overdrafts constantly, daily, to golf courses. Well, he didn't spend his money very good, but then again, he didn't have much money, and that's the way it is with a lot of poor pastors. And going to the Philippines a couple of years ago, I met some Assembly of God pastors there. They didn't get anything. And I have a pastor at this Baptist church that I'm working at who makes a boast that I'll never preach for money. This church never gives me a cent. That's not something to boast about, that you never preach for money. You never need to preach for money because you're not making the money that Elohim has set forth for you. You're not taking it. Therefore, in a way, you might be causing the church to sin. Sometimes these Torah regulations need to be followed to the letter. That Malachi passage goes on to say, the awesome curse of Elohim is cursing you, for your whole nation has been robbing me. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse so that there will be food enough for my temple. If you do, I will open up the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing so great that you won't have room enough to take it in. Try it. Let me prove it to you according to the Living Bible. Use the Living Bible here. So look, who eats the food? Yahweh doesn't eat the food. Yahweh doesn't eat. The food stands in for the provision for all the ministers. That's what we're talking about here. But Yahweh says he'll provide a huge blessing to saints who tithe to the minister. Part of the blessing is that the saints' money will thus be sanctified. All right, so you pay the temple fund, the temple tax. Next is your tithe, which means a tenth. They bring the tithe in as money, as provisions, as wine, as bread, and in the temple, it's divvied up appropriately. And then it is distributed to those who are on the list as ministers. Now, the ministers who receive the tithe also pay the tithe of what they received from the people. But the minister's tithe is to go back to their own teachers and ministers. Speaking of the priests of Aaron, not back to the church. The ministers must pay the tax and the tithe, but may also provide offerings for the church. Now, that's another category, offering. In the Yahad, we use this system. We have to have money in order to pay our expenses. They aren't big, maybe $500 a month for what we need to do. And we're very, very frugal, but we have to have that money every month. And the way I have this set up is you pay what I call dues, or the tax, a small amount every month in order to take care of administration. I'm not talking about salaries. Nobody gets a salary. It goes for the expenses that we have to keep the thing running. Some people pay a tithe, which for the most part, we use that tithe for ministers that come in. We pay ministers when we get special ones from outside the group, like Brother Schobelin. He says, I don't want to take the money. I say, it's imperative that you take this money. If you feel bad about it, give it away. That's your prerogative. It's my prerogative to send it there. And some of the tithe goes to other people for offerings. Fortunately, we're getting at least as much as our expenses each month, and we're getting some more. And since we don't need that extra tithe, rather than to save it up, I send it to foreign mission or domestic missions if there's a surplus. And we're being blessed for that. But I don't know another ministry, church, synagogue that does it this Torah way. And I think this is what Yahshua is talking about here in considering giving and taking. In addition then to the tax and the tithe, and this is important right now, there was a second tithe. Now, that second tithe went into a savings account for the Feast of Tabernacles, or under the bed, or in the drawer. At that time, the second tithe again went to the temple bankers, and they would put your second tithe in at interest. They would pay interest on your money until you were ready to take it out, just for the Feast of Tabernacles. This is how you get to go to Tabernacle. I hear this excuse all the time. I can't go. I don't have enough money. Or if they don't have enough money, they make another excuse, so you won't know that they don't have enough money. And numerous times in our feast history, we have paid for people to come that really needed to come and really had no money. But this is how I do it anyway. I put so much into a savings account every month so I can go. My target is $500. Now, you know that I'm up on a pension and Social Security, and I do a lot of things to try to get multiple streams of income coming in. And I'm thinking about Tabernacles coming up in October. I want to go. I want other people to go. We're planning to have one. We're planning to put it on, and we're planning not to charge anything for it. Why? Because we're going to assume that we get the message out about the second tithe early enough that people can start doing this. When you get a windfall, put some away. When money comes in from where you don't know, you put some away. When you get a check for $1,400, put some of that away. You've got enough right there to do several feasts if it costs nothing to get in. Look at these big ministers. You go to their Feast of Tabernacles, how much are you going to have to pay? I think the last one I heard about was that Baptist in Italy. What's his name? Monty Judah. $550 just to get in. Well, how do we pay for it then? We let you take your second tithe and give of it an offering of what you want when you get there. thought, how is that going to make your expenses? It's going to cost you about $4,000 for the tabernacle grounds and the lodge and all this. Where are you going to get that? That's not my problem. But we've done this time after time. We only ran into problems when somebody was running our feast that were charging people to get in. That's when we ran into problems. If we didn't charge and we talked about the second tithe, we never had a problem because the offerings that came in that week of tabernacles or Pesach or whatever. This is a revolutionary system. So when it's time for tabernacles, the money that was paid back, the money is paid back from your second tithe with interest. And then everybody in Israel took a week's vacation with the money. Now, that is what ingathering is all about. It's a vacation with your like-minded brothers and sisters and whoever else you want to bring with you. I hope you will consider that this year. You need to go to at least that feast and have your Pesach at home. You can do that at home. I think it was made for the home. As for the Pesach coming up April 6th, I have a home guide for you. I wrote it 20 years ago. It's still good today. If you want one, 10 of them, let me know. Set your family down and just go by the guide. You can do that. And even if you don't want to make it elaborate and there's only 2 people in your house or there's nobody there, but you have a friend or 2, bring them in and modify it for that use. Every 3rd and 6th year out of a 7-year cycle, a 3rd tithe was received exclusively for the poor, orphan, widow. Actually, I believe this is to be every year, but let me explain how it works. You think, well, I got the first tithe, that's 10%. And I have the second tithe, which I put away for myself, 10%. And a third tithe, 30%. How am I going to live? How am I going to pay my taxes? All right, here's how. Offerings up and above the tax and the tithe went for whatever purpose they were given. Okay, that's an offering. You want to come in and give an offering for the poor, give the money to the church or whatever, and they are under obligation to give to whatever cause that you designate. Same with us. And the offering was not accepted legally unless the tax and tithe were first paid. Oh, I was talking about the third tithe, all right? I get there in my notes. The third tithe, it's not a tithe at all. When you get done with your feast, your tabernacles, your ingathering, whatever money is left, that's the third tithe. Now, I checked this with Dr. Trim. We talked about it for quite some time. I wanted to make sure this was right. Whatever's left of that second tithe is considered to be the third tithe. Sometimes they would take whatever's left, if there was any left, and put it away again with the bankers. And then every 3 or 5 years, they would let that accumulate, and they would give that in 1 or 2 ways. The first way is that Yahweh says that they could spend it any way they wanted. See, you've already got the second tithe. You get to use that yourself. Money left over, you can take the remainder of it and use it any way you want, or put it in the temple banks and let it accumulate with interest. Or you could give this to the poor as alms. I guess it depends on how set you were financially, whether you could afford to give that third tithe away, because there's always the offering and alms. Those are the other categories of giving here. When a person's devoted to Yahweh and committed to this Torah system and fulfilled his requirements, Yahweh then cleansed the rest of his money for his own use. And this formula is what I use with the exception of the second tithe. Sounds like a lot of money, but actually after your vacation rebate, a saint paid, about 15 to 20% of his income to Yahweh. We can say to Yahweh rather than to a ministry or to a church, because this is his plan for giving to him. Remember what he said in Malachi 3 in regards to food. This is his way of giving. And your money is thus sanctified, the rest of it. And it's far less here than Treasury Department taxes. Then the rest of the money, images and all, became clean for the saints' use to do with whatever he pleased, with the exception of that which belonged to the emperor, whose likeness was on the coin. And in those days, it was the better part of what was left. I mentioned before that I believe the mark of the beast in that first century was the tax stamp in 66 AD, tax stamp with Nero Nero's name and face on it and the number of the year. I can't remember what it was in 66, but in our years it was 66, and Nero was 666. And what had to happen here before you could buy or sell? Anywhere in the Roman Empire, the first money you had to give was the tax. And you received a tax stamp on your goods, a tax stamp on your hand. It's like a big black tattoo, indelible ink, so it could be seen at all times, or on your forehead. You would receive a visible tax stamp there to show the Roman tax collectors in the most obvious way possible, especially if you got it on your head, that you paid your taxes and that you can legally buy food. Obviously, there had to be some barter going on because that tax was extraordinary. And for most people, they were in a place of starvation because they just couldn't pay that. It was so much. Romans would come take your land away. Here's one example. You know where they say a couple of the disciples were fishermen? Those fishermen in that time never ate their fish. They sold the fish immediately to rich Greeks that would come and get them, or to middlemen to sell them in Sepphoris. What the poor people ate, including the fishermen, were the minnows. They'd pick up the little minnows. This is even spoken of in the Gospel of Thomas. They'd pick those up. They'd prepare them like anchovies. They would pickle them in salt, pickle them in vinegar, dry them out. And often that was the only meat anyone ate. Their diet was of beans and lentils and farm stuff. Very little meat, except during feasts when they were killing all those animals in the temple and that food was being spread out all over the place. They all should have gave it away, and they used to give some of it away, but then they started selling it. But there were a lot of people in Galilee that didn't want any part of that meat because they considered that meat to be sacrificed to idols. So mammon had to be redeemed from the devil and sanctified under the use of the saints. However, Yahshua's method of redeeming unclean money, so I understand from Torah, and please do check me out, it's far stricter than that of the temple, because what was once a sound business had become a den of thieves due to unfaithful stewards. Followers of the way had to go beyond the righteousness of any scribe or Pharisee. And we remember that parable from Luke 21:1 that also illustrates this to some extent. The poor widow casting a thither, 2 mites, but you could still find those widow's mites today. I think you probably have one. A lot of people have purchased those for an exorbitant price. But all money that is truly to be devoted to the use of Yahweh has to cease to exist as mammon of unrighteousness. It has to come through his sanctifying system. And take the matter of the poor widow, the penurious widow put her life in the box along with her coin. How was she going to eat the same day? She was so certain of Elohim providing her substance because he'd done it year after year after year that she could go ahead and put all her money in there. And there just wasn't that much money among these people at that time, cash money. Oftentimes, to pay the tax, they had to give what grew on their farm. All right, let me see if I have any conclusion here with this conversion of money. Is anybody still there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Still here.
All right, here's what I get out of this, besides the system that I believe he's talking about. Yahshua is speaking of the failure of money to make heavenly friends with unrighteous mammon because you can't do anything with it to sanctifying unless you do it the right way, so that when your money is gone, Yahweh and his saints will see to your care. A lot of this has to do with faith. As we read in the Didache. There's a variant of the reading that if you have a text related to the King James Version, it'll say, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. I like that better. I like to look up that word fail and to look at the pronoun there, which I didn't do. But obviously, this variant speaks of one's demise, that your, shall we say, heavenly friends will be there to usher you into your own place in the millennial world if you're invested in their kingdom. If you have nothing built up from sanctifying your mammon in that high place, in the New Jerusalem, in the whole realm of your Father, what will you have? That's why he says, store up your treasures in heaven. Heaven's his way of saying the dimension of Yahweh, the dimension of the saint, the dimension of the righteous dead who are alive. If you read John 5, like I asked you to, they never die. I'm not going to die. I'm going to be transformed. I'm going to find myself right here on earth, heading up to the New Jerusalem in the sky, where I'm going to be trained to come back down here on earth and be a part of the evangelism effort, or to come down here on earth and be a part of the effort to see to the care of all resurrected individuals as they pop up. Building houses for them, housing them, bringing them home, mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, building mansions, own on my house. A mansion is not a big house on the mansion up over the hill on the hilltop. A mansion is a room that you build onto your house when your son or daughter is getting married, to bring that spouse into the house and see if the two can live together and get along for 1 year. So the bride comes into the house of the groom, lives in the mansion. It's not mentioned that the groom lives in the room with the bride any place, but I suppose that's probably the case. I suppose that they have to see how their marriage is going to work out. And then when the next son gets a bride, there's another mansion built on. This is what this wedding theology is all about. The wedding supper of the Lamb. You are building mansions onto your house to house those that are coming back one after the other. And maybe if you built on 3 mansions, the first person that you took in, maybe your mother or grandmother, has been there long enough, maybe 3 years, in order to take over the house. There'll be one empty mansion then, while you go off to do your work of an evangelist in Borneo or Malaysia or on the stock exchange. I think the most startling secret of this text is when it's translated literally, end up with it. Make friends with money, mammon, so that when you leave out, they may take you upward by the hand into everlasting skins. Doesn't sound anything like we have in our Bible. I mean, oh yeah, I got to say that like our pastor does. In our Bible. Our Bible does not say this at all. Make friends with mammon so that when you leave out, they may take you upward by the hand, texontai, into everlasting skins. Skeno. Skeno often refers to the Feast of Tabernacles, by the way. In fact, that word in John 1 that says, and he dwelt among us, or he tabernacled among us, and skeno is that word, same word. He tented among us, everlasting tents, everlasting skins, literally. Now, isn't that something? Everlasting skin. That speaks of eternal or ageless riches and everlasting life as an important and active minister in the kingdom of Elohim. That's even better than 20 more years on this earth with $600 million to spend. Amen? Okay, your thoughts. Should I go out to the chat? Anybody left here? Yeah, good. Well, for the widows and fatherless, that's any time. That's an alms. Or that can be the remainder of your third tithe. And I think that must have come when Trim and I were talking. He indicated, I don't know what his source was, that it was either Torah or some other Mishnah or some commentary that said every third and sixth year. Is that correct? Is that Torah, Vicki?
It is. I believe it's in Leviticus that the third and sixth year tithe is for the widow and the fatherless.
In Leviticus. Okay, I'll find that then. So what about the worldwide? Do they do it that way?
Yeah, they did a really, it was very much like that. They would have the first tithe, and then they would separate the second, and the third tithe would come out every third year. It was pretty much done just the way Leviticus outlines it.
That's really good. Now, if they could just get the sacred name. Let's see what else is here. The wicked prosper. Yeah. Doesn't that make you mad? I'll tell you what, it used to be that, well, I'll tell you, in my 15th year after high school, I went back to one reunion and I sat down with some guys that I knew, and I was a minister. I went in a clerical collar. I sat there thinking about, I always had a lot of things going in the churches I served. My mind's always going around, what can I do to bring these people together? I was thinking about that, and these guys at the table began to talk about their investment clubs and how much money they were going to have when they retired. Now it's to that point. They're all retired now. I hope it worked out well for them, but I felt jealous, not to the point of wanting to give up what I had chosen to do with my life, but I did feel that green feeling of jealousy. I had to put that out of my mind. And now most of them are dead. There's a few that are alive. I don't know how they're doing, but they are retired. They must have done pretty well. But they have absolutely no knowledge or experience with Elohim. And one of these days, their soul is going to be required of them. I feel bad about that.
Could that be an example then of verse 9? That they
explain that a little more.
They made friends for themselves by unrighteous mammon. You said they don't know Elohim. And they're dead, so they have failed. What good is whatever they saved up for all these years if they're dead? And they shall receive you into everlasting dwellings. Would that be an example of verse 9?
Think of it this way. You just struck me with something here. Do you know when you answer somebody in the affirmative when you mean exactly the opposite? Like,
right. That's what I was saying earlier.
Yes. Yeah. Think of that. I never thought of that way. Thank you.
That's what I had said earlier, that's what he was saying. It's kind of like what you say to your kids. Well, if you want to go hang out with that person, go right ahead, but you're going to find out that you're going to get in trouble. That's just an example of the opposite. You really don't want them to do that.
Yeah.
Of like, experience is the best teacher. Go see for yourself. Don't listen to me. Go see for yourself. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Then again, with it saying ageless skins at the end. Ageless skins? Yeah, well, could Yahshua be using this turn of speech here? He certainly could. We wouldn't have trouble interpreting this if we interpreted it your way. Thank you. I've written it down here in the chat, so I'll find it again. In fact, I want to do that just a little more.
That's really a poor example, but, I have kids and that just, comes to mind.
He means exactly the opposite through hyperbole. I know there's a name for that kind of turn of phrase, but I don't know what it is. Hyperbole. Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question, but, I want to give other people a chance to say whatever.
Well, they've got to say something.
Okay, well, I'm still going to give them a chance to. Okay. I don't want to dominate.
What was your comment? Your comments are always good.
To me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had a question. I'm a little... I'm not quite sure, and this is for anybody, anybody who knows, but when you say the second tithe, I have two questions, actually. When you say, like the tithe where it says in Leviticus, take your tithe that you would use, save it up, and if you can't, for Sukkot, for Feast of Tabernacles. When you say second tithe, is that also like so the tithe, the 10% tithe is for the priest, and then the second tithe, would that also be like a 10%?
Yes, 10%, but remembering that you're going to get this money back.
Right, because you're going to, when you said, take an extra, 10%, or if you get a windfall or whatever, put some aside, and then, in your savings account. And then when Sukkot comes around, then you take it out and you can use it to, travel or whatever it is.
Yes, why charge people to go to Sukkot when they are having a second tithe? What you can do at Sukkot is take offerings for food and so forth. If you do it even in the organization, then I think we'll have this year some money even to buy the food and all. Whereas in the past, when we didn't charge anything, we just passed the plate for food, and we felt very good about whatever we got, because honest to goodness, we were trusting Elohim to pay for that. Well, Professor Smith has been with us at a boot camp and a couple of feasts.
And so if people don't have, the Sukkots I've been to, like it's at a public campground, and you just pay your own campsite, whatever that is.
All right. But
there was no charge for the speaker or anything like that. They took up offerings or whatever, but there wasn't like a fee to get into the Sukkot other than just, if you want, you want to come there, you just pay whatever it costs for your campsite.
Our folks were by and large older folks. Like I tented the last time we had one. It was in 19. We didn't have one last year. And I just couldn't do it. I can't do it anymore. And that was the way. We had several handicapped people in the group. And so I would get a lodge.
Right. I see. Yeah. And there were like cabins and stuff people could rent.
Yeah. Cabins. If you wanted to come get your own cabin, you would have to pay for that. But if you come stay in the lodge, and the lodge often had a men's side and a woman's side, and then in between there would be a place for a gathering, that's expensive.
It is. Okay, so my second question is, in the age that we live in now, where I know a lot of people think they're Levites, but they, so how do you, in the new covenant, how do you take that 10% tithe that is meant for the priest and keep it Torah?
Here's how you can. There's two ways.
Okay.
In fact, the scripture tells us one of those ways is to actually take a tenth of what you have and give it to them. The other way, see, it's illegal for a recognized ministry to take money designated for something and use it for something else. That's strictly illegal. That will put you out of business, get you sued. So we are a legal organization. And if you designate money as a tithe or as an offering or as a second tithe, we're not going to spend it on anything but what you designate it for.
So if you just send money in a tithe and send money and say this is for the general fund or this is for you personally as the leader, which would be the priest, which, would be the minister of the congregation. If you specify what you want it used for, that's what it has to be used for.
Exactly. I have a few people that send me part of their tithes. Else I couldn't do this. It's expensive to run an internet kingdom as I do. It's expensive. But we have to have it because that's our ministry. That's what we're called to do. So there are some people that designate it to me, and people that designate it to certain ministries that are connected with us. And then there's a general fund, which general fund simply means use it any way you want. And so on our donation page, to pay dues or general fund. So that means that I can use that money for bills that we have, or I can use that money for stuff that we need.
Like light bulbs and internet.
Yeah, right. Things like that. Or printer ribbons. Here recently, I had to buy some stuff at Staples. That's expensive stuff, but I couldn't find it anywhere else. But not often. We just have our certificates. We had a lot of people that graduated to the next level here, so they're going to receive a very nice gift. And that money would come out of our dues or general fund.
Now I have a third question, and then this really will be it. Professor Smith's comment, people can even designate for those financially hard up so they can go to a feast or specific things like that. You can use the 10%, the tithe to, like, I'll just use Melissa for an example because she just makes such a good example for everything. If she wanted to go to Sukkot and didn't have the money, does that mean that if I wanted to tithe, I could send her the money and say, here's the money for you to go to Sukkot in the fall? Is that what you mean, Professor? Would that be like Torah, correct Torah?
Well, what I meant was, let's say you have someone who was, financially disadvantaged. That money, if you want to send that into the office, then you could designate it. And then the office then would disperse it for that particular need. I think there's been a couple times that we've had that situation come up too, where people, and they didn't want to know they did not want the person receiving to know where it was coming from.
Right.
So that's why it was sent to the office, and the office disperses it according to the specific, if it's specifically marked that way.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. I understand.
That's probably the best way because look, you don't know what they're going to do with that money and what excuse they're going to make at the time. So that's when I pay other people's, just like Smith said, I put it away. And then when they make their decision that they're coming, that's when it goes out.
Thank you. That makes sense. But I guess then it is okay to send a tithe, which is for that purpose, for not the priest, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yes. All that is
still considered tithe, not all
that is up to you. You decide what's what. However, all I'm saying is that the ministry should be a repository or a depository for whatever it is that you designate, irregardless of whether you pay tithes or dues or anything else.
Right.
All they can do is be the intermediary. And like I said, oftentimes that's because if you give the money right over to the person, they're going to spend it on booze or something else. So designate your funds.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
On our donation page, we have it split down into about 6 different places you can designate, or you can send a message in to say what it's to go to. I'm not trying to fish out some money from you guys at all, but that's the way it should be.
It's a difficult subject. It really needs to be talked about more. Everyone is so afraid to talk about it because people, I think, want to do it right. And then other people who are in ministry don't like to talk about it for fear fear that they're going to be accused of always, looking to get some money. And that's just not
Been
the
there,
case.
done that.
Yeah. And because no one's willing to or afraid to talk about it, so many people are, then people like me who are just, I don't know what to do, so I just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't get an honest biblical, how do I go about doing this biblically? And, so I want people to talk about it. I think it needs to be talked about more that's my opinion.
Well, you have a way to do that now. And I can tell you that whether you pay a tithe or not, a little bit goes a long way. I have some people that are so poor, they can't pay their dues. So my advice to them is go get a money order for whatever you can and send it in so that we can keep you on the roll here, because you need what we have for you. I'm talking about people that are also kind of spiritually bankrupt, poor of spirit too, that really, really cling to the ministry. Mm-hmm. All right. Anybody else? That was really good. Really good. Let's pray and we'll go on then. Father, a personal prayer and prayer request that you would bless these people that are on here today, especially bless them through this word, but even more than that, we pray that you would bless them financially so that maybe they could go ahead and do this thing and get started on this thing so that, as Vicky said, the fear, the doubt, the feeling of guilt that I had for so many years might pass away. And that even with a little bit, some people would really benefit, especially in foreign countries. $5 can do a lot. So bless them financially. Bless me financially. You have. And Elohim bless the Vero Essene Yahad. We give it to you in the name of Yahshua, our master. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, my friends. Have a great night.
You too, everybody. Shalom.
You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.